Ghost Rider fans, rejoice. We might have a good reason to play him coming up soon. Or is that just copium? Let's find out in this installment of...
Is it worth it?
What's up, nerds? Black Knight's almost here, and some people are like, meh, and some people are like, yeah. In this video, we're gonna break down his mechanics, how he functions, the good, the bad, potential deck lists, and then ultimately give him a final judgment and deem him worth it or not. So real quick, Black Knight reads, after you discard a card, add the Ebony Blade to your hand with that card's power, once per game. So real quick on the mechanics about how this card works, I had a couple of questions, so I figured them out. It is the first card you discard. It doesn't matter what that card is. And yes, Apocalypse is counted as being discarded even though it's put back in your hand. I know when I first started playing the game, I thought it was a little confusing because Hela says everything you discard gets brought back. Well, I figured it would bring back Apocalypse even though, you know, it got put back in your hand. Basically, Ebony Blade is going to function like Dracula. So if you discard an Apocalypse, you know, it's 8 power and then it does this little animation and then it's 12 power. Well, Ebony Blade will be 12 power. Like if you discard Wolverine as the first card, then Ebony Blade would be a 4 power. Second thing, the card says once per game. So you can't bounce Black Knight back to your hand expecting to get another Ebony Blade when you play him back out. In order to get 2 Ebony Blades, you need to generate a new one via Moon Girl or some other effect like that. And the last thing that might seem a little tricky is its base power. It's 0. Much like how Spider-Ham, the pig, if it gets Shadow Kinged, that pig will go back down to 0 power. Well, Ebony Blade is going to function just the same way. All right, with that out of the way, let's look at some of the good parts of the card and the bad parts of the card. Good news first. So, this is a new way to play discard. You can make weird hybrid like Hela and Apocalypse decks that are running Black Knight and Hela and Apocalypse and Dracula and sort of like combine the two decks. Or you could just run an Apocalypse deck that just doesn't use Swarm and MODOK. I think that's really interesting and definitely something worth exploring. The second good part about this card is it's hard to counter. Much like Dracula is hard to counter, if you play your Ebony Blade correctly, the opponent's going to have to either Shadow King or Shang-Chi it just at the right moment for them to stop the Ebony Blade. And considering the decks we'll take a look at coming up soon, you can't Shang and Shadow King every lane. The last thing is it cheats a lot of power out. I know in the past some people have thought Dracula was very annoying and hard to deal with and therefore needed some sort of rework. Completely disagree, but it's basically the second Dracula type effect in the game where you spend 4 energy and then you can cheat out as much power as you are willing to put effort into the card. I can't think of anything else aside from Dracula that is able to crank out 20 power from 4 energy. On to the bad. The effect here is super niche. It is not plug and play at all. So ultimately, Black Knight is really going to only fit in 1, 2, 3 decks is even pushing it. But I think after all said and done, after people figure out how to use him best, there's only going to be 2 decks that he's even viable in. But I mean, with a niche card like that, it's probably a good thing because his effect is potentially very abusable. The second negative to this card is it requires the deck to be built around him. Either your whole deck has to be built around discarding stuff and bringing stuff back, or you can run some deck like we'll show in a moment where it's like a hybrid list that just so happens to run Ghost Rider and Black Knight, but then you also need like a Lady Sif or a Blade, and then also a couple of big things for him to discard. So at the very minimum, if you put Black Knight in your deck, it's automatically taking up 4 minimum slots, more realistically, probably like 5 or 6. Last negative of this card is it's only good if you play him out the first couple of turns. Playing this thing out on turn 4, maybe you can pull something off with like a Blade, but playing it out on 4, 5, and 6, it's probably just going to be a dead card or 2 power card at the most. Let's move on to some example deck lists. First up here is a Ghost Rider Zabu deck. Now, if some of you remember, Zabu used to give -2 energy to your 4-cost cards, and a deck that looked very similar to this was an absolute tyrant on the ladder. Now, Zabu is still a solid card, but that deck obviously fell off when Zabu got changed, but Black Knight might bring that deck back. The goal of this deck is to cheat out big power with efficient cards. Basically play your Black Knight out early, discard your Infinite or Giganto, have Ebony Blade be imprinted with those powers, and then you can also bring it back with a Ghost Rider. That's 2 lanes you're going to have really big power in. The thing about this deck, and Black Knight in general, is that it's pretty hard to counter. I mean, you have Dracula here, Black Knight here, and Ghost Rider and Jubilee. Like, you can't stop big power in all 3 lanes, and this deck definitely has the potential to do that. Also, we're running armor, so there's one more way to beat this out the window. Jubilee and Black Cat are sort of like backup plans here. Like if you don't have a good thing to imprint on the Ebony Blade, well, your Black Cat gets discarded. You get a 4/9. That's not bad. And then you just bring that back with Ghost Rider. That's still a ton of power for a little effort. And then your Dracula at the end of the game discards at the minimum an America Chavez. And then your Jubilee cheats out one of your big things too. This deck just has redundancy on multiple levels. It's hard to stop, and I think this particular list is probably going to be the best place for Black Knight, and it might shake up the meta a little bit. If you want to be super consistent and make this deck even more stable, you take out Giganto and Infinite for playable 6 power cards, like regular Hulk and Magneto. Next up is a different way to play Apocalypse discard decks. You get rid of the MODOK, the Colleen, the Swarm, and all the usual suspects in the typical discard list you're used to seeing, and you replace that with Black Cat, Hela, Invisible Woman, and Black Knight. Basically, you play this like you would play the regular Apocalypse discard decks, but instead of a turn 6 where you're spamming a bunch of Swarms out and an America Chavez, and then your Dracula is getting a giant Apocalypse, here you have an additional plan of just playing Hela out on the last turn of the game and getting back a Black Cat, your Infinite, whatever, and then still doing your Dracula discarding something big game plan. I've always chirped on about how Hela is a value card, not a combo card, and I think this deck is another way to express that. Bringing back 2 or 3 cards, not getting too greedy, still putting a lot of power on the board. So, is Black Knight worth it? You gotta keep in mind he's Series 5, so that's 6k tokens. That's a lot of tokens, especially for a niche card that I don't think anyone's arguing is only going to be good in a couple of decks. So I cannot recommend spending 6k tokens on this dude. Spotlight caches are a little different. The other 2 cards in these spotlight caches coming up are Stature and MODOK. So if you don't have Stature or MODOK and you like discard, then yeah, it's totally worth it to go for the spotlight caches. But if you have Stature and MODOK, well, now you're in a tough spot. That's where I am. I really want Black Knight, but I really don't need or want the variants of the other stuff in the spotlight cache. But I make content and I really like discard. I think that's what this boils down to. If you like just discard decks in general, whether it's Ghost Rider or Hela or APOC Dracula decks, then yeah, it's probably worth it because this card is going to be interesting. It might flop, it might be really great and abusable. So I think that's my final judgment. If you love discard, yeah, go for it. Caches only though. If you are not a fan of discard, then probably skip this week because we have Nico and Werewolf coming out soon. Alright, I hope this helped. Thank you so much for watching. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Consider becoming a member because I am doing some collaborations with other content creators here in the coming months. And I'm going to be getting members of my channel involved in maybe some like draft battle games or just in one way or another. And you can only do that if you're a member. So please support me that way. If you think I'm dumb, become a member. Crush me in some conquest battles. But that's it. Thank you so much. Later, nerds.